Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning into my first YouTube video. Not first of all time. Some of you, if you're tuning in, you might be longtime followers of the content I've created over the past 4 years through Blitzalytics, whether it is through my writing or through the YouTube series I did, whether it's was Cody Talks NFL for the past few years, or any of the couple fantasy football shows that I done in the past with Blitzalytics. If you guys haven't followed me since then, I have kind of moved on from Blitzalytics. I am writing for Colts Wire through USA Today. There are some other potential opportunities I am currently working on, and I'll announce those at the proper time. But one of the things I definitely wanted to get going, and I've been dying to do this all summer. I just, as any of my past supporters know that know me, I just love to talk and vocally get my opinion out about the NFL. And so I decided, you know what? Why not start my own YouTube channel and see where this thing takes me? So for my first video, any of the people that used to listen to me from the past 2 to 3 years from fantasy football know that I love to target wide receivers that are entering year three of being in the NFL. Typically, by the year three, those players, not only they're improving as route runners in the league, but they're going to have a better understanding of the scheme that they're in. Obviously setting a course if they're underneath the same coaching staff, but as long as they've been in that same scheme for about 3 years, they're going to understand the nuances of that offense and what it's going to take for them to get open and see as many targets as they can get. And on top of that, taking advantage of those targets and producing you fantasy points for your team. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into this. The past couple years, I've done a written article. This will be my first time doing a specific episode just talking about year three wide receivers. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Let's look at some examples. Every year you can look and you can find multiple guys that are in their year three that have seen an uptick in production. I'll look at the last 3 years. Look at Tyler Boyd. As you can see on this graphic, year one, he had 54 receptions, 603 yards, and a touchdown. He was a little banged up in year two, 22 receptions, 25 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then boom, year three, he's got 108 targets, 76 receptions, 1,028 yards, 7 touchdowns. Now let's look at Chris Godwin from 2019. His first year, just 34 receptions, 525 yards, and a touchdown. His second year, he saw some growth, 59 receptions, 842 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And then by year three, boom, he blows up. He has 121 targets, 86 receptions, 1,333 yards, and 9 touchdowns in his 14 games. Last year was Calvin Ridley, who was my number one wide receiver on my year three guys I was targeting last year. Year one and year two are basically the same, right? Look at 64, 63 receptions, 821 yards, 866 yards, 10 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns. And then boom, year three blows up. 143 targets, 90 receptions, 1,374 yards, and 9 touchdowns in his 15 games last year. Now, this isn't a 100% bulletproof plan, but more than likely, if I'm going to bet on a wide receiver for my team, if I can get as many year three guys on my roster, that's what I'm going to do. So what you're going to see in this episode, I'm going to list my top 5 guys that I am looking to target for this year's, either in redraft, maybe acquiring them in Dynasty, or maybe just even keep some of these names I'm going to go through in mind for later on the season, or maybe daily fantasy, whatever type of fantasy you play. I think this is stuff that you could be relevant and guys you want to target before the season coming up. So these are for sure 5 locked in guys that I would be willing to spend a draft selection on. Number 1, if you guys know me, you know this guy was going to be number 1 in my heart. He's been there since I did the pre-draft process with this guy. It's DK Metcalf. Guy's an absolute stud. Not only he's already a star in this league, but I think this year in year 3, he's going to become a superstar. Look at the last couple years. Year 1, 100 targets, 58 receptions, 900 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Year 2, he had 129 targets, 83 receptions, 1,303 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Now, here's a little stat I pulled earlier this summer when I was doing some stat research for the upcoming season. DK Metcalf, since 2018, he's one of only 8 players to have a season of 80 receptions, 1,000 plus yards, and 10 plus touchdowns. So this guy's already blooming, and you're talking about this guy can get up to elite levels within the wide receiver realm of today's NFL with a big year 3. And I think he's set to do that. His workload's not going to change. Yes, they got Dwayne Eskridge in the second round, but that guy's going to be more of a field stretcher to help open up things for DK, which is even better for him. Same thing goes for Gerald Everett. He's more of a receiving tight end, can stretch out the seam, but that's going to benefit DK. So not many eyes are on him and should help elevate Seattle's passing offense. So DK is my number 1 receiver that I am targeting out of the year 3 guys. Now let's move on to number 2, and honestly, it's more of a 1A, 1B if you want to be honest, but A.J. Brown. Guy's been a stud since he entered the league. Take a look at the last couple years. Year 1, he had 84 targets, 52 receptions, 1,051 yards, 8 touchdowns, plus he got a rushing touchdown his rookie year. And then year 2, you saw an uptick. He got 106 targets, 70 receptions, 1,075 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Now, A.J. Brown was, honestly, like, as much as I love DK Metcalf, if they didn't get Julio, I was probably going to have to put A.J. Brown as my number 1 because he would have got all those targets that were emptied with went blank there. Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith leaving the team. But they got Julio. Julio's going to get a majority of those targets that those guys are leaving over. But that's still going to leave enough for A.J. Brown. Julio is going to open up things. But we also had to see what this offense will be underneath their new offensive coordinator now that Arthur Smith is over in Atlanta. But I still think A.J. is going to be a great wide receiver to have on your roster. And, I mean, we saw it last year. Yeah, even with Julio on your team, look at Calvin Ridley, year 3, blew up. And I don't think we can, think that Julio's just going to absolutely hurt his fantasy value. So, yeah, if you can get A.J. Brown on your team, definitely do it. Like I said, 1A, 1B for me on DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown. I'm going to go to my number 3 year 3 wide receiver. That's Terry McLaurin. Scary Terry, whatever he wants to call himself. This dude's actually absolutely electric on the field with his route running ability. Let's take a look at his last couple years. Year 1, he had 93 targets, 58 receptions, 919 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And then in year 2, he had 134 targets, 87 receptions. He had 1,118 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, I love Terry McLaurin. Now, he's kind of been hampered by quarterback play over the last couple of years. Now, he's getting Ryan Fitzpatrick, so not only that's great for him, because he's going to have a quarterback that can push the ball down the field. The offense has kind of been limited to more of short and intermediate routes because who was playing quarterback for them, whoever it was, whether it's Dwayne Haskins, Alex Smith, Taylor Heineke, whoever it is. Now, my biggest concern with Terry McLaurin is, are we going to get a full hot Fitzmagic all year? Because, we've seen the ups and downs, and if it's downs, it's like, is Terry going to be consistent? But he's been so good with bad quarterback play. I think he's definitely, that's why he's up at my number 3 spot. The kid is a stud. If I'm looking at anything, the uptick in his production, you look at the last couple of years, first year he had 7 touchdowns. The last year he only had 4 touchdowns. So you want to see him to get more touchdowns. I want to see him, I think in year 3, I think this is the year he cracks the 10 touchdown mark. And he got all those targets last year. And I think with Fitzpatrick, he should be able to be more efficient with his targets and turn those into production. Now I'm going to move on to my number 4 wide receiver on my list for year 3 guys. That's Deebo Samuel. Deebo's an absolute stud. I think he would be a lot higher on most people's lists this year if he didn't get banged up in year 2. Some people may have forgot how good this dude is with the ball in his hands. But take a look at the last couple years. Year 1, he had 81 targets, 57 receptions, 802 yards. He also had the 3 touchdowns. But he also had 3 rushing touchdowns. So that's what kind of makes Deebo great. Is he Kyle Shanahan can manufacture touches for him, whether it's handing the ball off to him, little screen dumps, or just using his route running ability where he can get open in that intermediate range for his quarterback. Now, year two was a little bit of a letdown because of his injuries. He only played 7 games, but he still had 44 targets, 33 receptions, 391 yards, and a touchdown. But the reason why I love Debo this year, and I think he's definitely worth the risk, is, I mean, outside of Brandon Ayuk, I mean, he doesn't really have much competition for touches as out of the wide receiver room. Yes, George Kittle will be back. He'll be healthy, but that's good for him because that's going to open up things for Debo Samuel. I think they're probably going to, with him being in year 3 and being in that scheme underneath Kyle Shanahan for the last 2 years, I think Kyle's probably going to more likely going to open up the playbook for him and probably have a section just for Debo. I think Debo's going to have a huge year 3 as long as he can stay in the field. Finally, my number 5 year 3 wide receiver that I want to get no matter what, that's Deontay Johnson from the Steelers. The kid, he's had his struggles, whether it's drops or fumbles, but he's been productive and he gets you'll see he gets tons of targets, right? Year 1 he had 92 targets, 59 receptions, 680 yards, 5 touchdowns in 16 games. Now year 2, I mean, look, he had 144 targets. Now he only had 88 receptions on those 144 targets, so you do want to see more efficiency with that. He didn't crack 1,000 yards, 923 yards. He had 7 touchdowns in his 15 games. So I think with a year 3 boom from Deontay, I think you're going to probably see the same target and reception share. Maybe he can get up to 100 receptions, 923 yards. You want to see him get above 1,000 this year, and then also crack that 10 touchdown mark. My biggest concern though with Deontay is that the fact that the Steelers, they got Juju, they got Chase Claypool. They still got Eric Ebron on the roster. They just drafted Najee Harris. So I just got to see how this offense is going to flow. But I'm still wanting to leave a draft or go acquire him in Dynasty or whatever the case is for your league. I think he's going to be able to produce and have a good year 3 in the league. Now, there's tons of guys from that 2019 draft class. So let's take a look at some other guys you might want to consider. I've kind of made I have 3 more tiers of players for you guys to kind of keep these names in mind. The next tier is basically guys I'm willing to use a draft selection on. I'm just going to run over them. I'm not going to go through their stats or anything. These guys are Marquise Brown. The reason why, he's a year 3 guy, first round pick. Yes, they got Sammy Watkins and Rashad Bateman, but if anything, he's been in 3 years in that scheme. He knows the offense. He has a chemistry with Lamar Jackson. So if those guys that were added to the team can help open up things for Marquise, I think he can finally become the Hollywood Brown that everybody thought he could when he entered the draft. So he's a guy I'm willing to roll the dice on my bench. And then if he does blow up and take that year 3 boom, you got an explosive playmaker in your lineup. Another guy that could be an explosive playmaker is Paris Campbell. Second round pick that year for the Colts. Played as maybe 15 games the last 2 years because he's been banged up. But the team still believes in him. The kid has electric speed on the field whenever he is on. So if he can put a full 16 game schedule, and with if Carson Wentz can be the Carson Wentz that we saw in the past, I mean, he might be the wide receiver to own from the Colts wide receiver room. And I'm sure wherever Campbell's going right now, he's probably going to be like a last round pick because nobody's really, taking that much of a gamble. Another guy, McCole Hardman. McCole is a guy that I think could take a big year 3 step. Yes, they got Tyreek. Yes, they got Travis Kelce, but we saw Sammy leave. So there's a lot of there's a big opportunity for him to see an uptick in targets and have a bigger role in the offense. So he's a guy I'm willing to take a chance and have him on my bench. Lastly, Jacoby Myers. He's a guy you can see right here with my Colts fan. I'm a Colts fan, by the way, if you guys do not know, but I've always had a problem owning Patriots players, but I had Jacoby Myers last year. He's one of the very few bright spots on that Patriots offense from last year. And if he takes that year 3 step, I'm not really concerned with the tight ends coming in, with Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar coming in. I think this guy has 3 years in Bill Belichick's scheme, which everybody knows the stories that wide receivers can have a tough time adjusting to the New England Patriots offensive scheme. They always say it's hard to learn, so he has an advantage over those guys coming in. And I think if he does take that next step, and whether it's Cam Newton or Mac Jones, and as long as it's quality quarterback play, I think there's a chance he can provide you some fantasy value this year. I'd add him on the bench, see how his role unfolds, and then go from there. Now, speaking of seeing how their roles unfold, I'm just going to run over these guys. These are guys. I guess I wouldn't draft these guys. These are more of players to watch maybe the preseason, the first like 2 to 3 weeks of the season, and see how they're being used. Or some of these guys are based on like if injuries would happen in front of them. Speaking of that, Scotty Miller. Kid is a stud. We all saw what he did last year, even with that crowded wide receiver room. But he's just not going to get enough targets for you to draft him. But if you start seeing like any of the Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, or Godwin get hurt at any point, go scoop up Scotty Miller on your bench. Darius Slayton is a guy I like from New York. He's kind of a little explosive playmaker. He lacks consistency for you to draft. They added Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney in the draft. So he's a guy just to watch, see how his role unfolds in the offense. But if guys start to drop in that wide receiver room, go pick him off the waivers. Hunter Renfrow for the Raiders. He's just he's a slot PPR machine. He's not a guy I really want to draft. They really didn't make much additions. They lost Nelson Aguilar, so his role is probably the same. But I just don't know if he's going to be a guy you want in your starting lineup. Just to watch his role, see if he's going to see a steady weekly reception mark to be a PPR machine. Because for me, I personally I play in leagues that have 3 wide receivers in the starting lineup. So one of those spots in my starting lineup, I prefer a guy. He might not get big time plays, but he's going to get peppered with targets. Hunter Renfrow might be that guy for the Raiders this year. Travis Fulgham, one of the very few bright wide receiver spots from the Eagles last year. He was a surprise. He had some big games. Yes, they did add Devontae Smith, I went blank there, in the draft. They're obviously hoping up for a big year 2 from Jalen Reagor. But, Travis Fulgham, he produced in that offense last year, so I think he's going to be given the opportunity to have a role in the offense again this year. Now, it is a new coaching staff, so you just got to watch and see how his role unfolds there. N'Keal Harry, I know nobody likes him right now. He's had a terrible start to his career. I'm not going to be one of the guys that pretend I didn't like him. I actually had him as my wide receiver 2 in that draft class. I thought he could be a playmaker at the next level with his catch radius. I did, probably should have considered his lack of ability to create separation. But, at the end of the day, he's got the talent. He just has to put it together if he can. And obviously it's not going to happen in New England. So the reason why he's in this tier is, what if he goes to Detroit? Detroit doesn't really have much in their wide receiver room. If he goes to Detroit, he's going to get a bunch of targets. And what is volume is king in fantasy football. So if he goes to Detroit, he's getting a bunch of targets, and he can turn that target into production. That's all you need on your fantasy football team. So keep an eye out to see where he lands. Now, this next name I'm going to probably butcher. Olamide Zaccheaus from the Falcons. Everybody knows Julio's gone. That's a bunch of targets. I'm sure Kyle Pitts is going to take a majority of those targets. I'm sure some of that's going to go more towards Calvin Ridley. They do have Russell Gage, but Olamide Zaccheaus has produced before in this league. So if he could take that next year 3 jump, he could be a surprising guy to either have on your bench, and maybe he turns into maybe like a wide receiver 3 or 4 in fantasy football. So keep an eye on his role, especially during the preseason as we get into the beginning of the season. Another guy, I'm not sure I put him here because I love his electrical ability. He's a little jitterbug, but it's Deontay Harris from the Saints. He's been more of a, punt returner. He's returned punts for touchdowns, did it against the Bucs last year in the playoffs when they lost that game. He was a guy that Bruce Arians pointed out that he's worried about. And when you're with Sean Payton, he's a creative mind. We really don't know what this offense is going to look like. Is it going to be Jameis? Is it going to be Taysom Hill? Is it going to be both of them? But I think Deontay Harris could have an opportunity to carve out this little, I don't know if he's going to be a purely wide receiver. Maybe they can use him as a running back. They really don't have much in that wide receiver room as far as locked in guys into their roles. So I think he has an opportunity to have a year 3 jump and have a much larger role. Just watch and see how that unfolds. I could be completely wrong. But just watch the preseason, read the reports, see his role in the first couple weeks, and if he has a pretty big role, maybe scoop him up on your bench and he can become a playmaker for you. All right, last guys, these are potential deep sleepers. These are just guys kind of similar. I don't know if they're going to have anything come out this year. These are guys kind of maybe they're on the limb of their rosters. Maybe they just have too much in front of them to produce right away. Preston Williams, he got hurt right before the season last year. He flashed as a rookie. There's a lot of guys in front of him with the additions of Will Fuller, the burner, Jalen Waddle, and Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker's dealt with injuries in the past, so has Will Fuller. Those two guys go down. All of a sudden, Preston Williams has a bigger role. The third guy, next guy, Olabisi Johnson. He's a guy that produced as a rookie for the Vikings. Kind of fell off last year. They did draft Emir Marset in the draft this year, and they also have like Chad Beebe there. So his role is kind of up in the air right now. But if all of a sudden something happens with Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson, they're going to have to lean on Olabisi Johnson, some guy that's been on the team, knows the offense over the last 3 years. So that's just a name to watch if you end up owning one of those top Viking wide receiver guys. Jalen Guyton's the guy that got some starts in last year for the Chargers. Yeah, if you guys remember, Justin Herbert was stretching the field out with some of his wide receivers that you didn't know who they were last year. Jalen Guyton was one of those guys. He's not a guy, you want to actively go get. They did draft a Josh Palmer in the 3rd round of the draft this year. But he's just a guy to watch because if something happens with Keenan Allen, something happens with Mike Williams, all of a sudden he's going to have a bigger role in the offense. Again, these guys are more of names to, like, oh man, this guy got hurt. Let's see who's available. Try to keep these names and maybe put them on your watch list for the year. This next one we're probably going to upset Eagles fans, but JJ Arcega-Whiteside from the Eagles. He's a guy. He was in my top 10 too, guys. Sorry, in that draft class, I thought he could be a red zone threat. He just hasn't done anything at all. But again, we've seen there's past like Nelson Aguilar. Look at year 1, year 2. Didn't do much. Year 3, he blew up. So there's always these guys that can maybe do nothing in the first 2 years. All of a sudden, year 3, they blow up and they can turn their career around. Maybe that can be it for Arcega-Whiteside. He's got 3 guys at least in front of him, but maybe with a good training camp, he can climb up the roster. That Eagles team, most people think they're going to be bad, so they're probably playing catch-up for a lot of games. So that's something to consider if they're going to be a pass-heavy offense because they're playing catch-up all year. Maybe he has an opportunity, but I think his opportunity would only come if a bunch of injuries happen to guys within that room. Riley Ridley's another guy I liked in that class. He plays for the Chicago Bears. Now, if there's any path to production, it is for Riley Ridley. There's not much there outside of Allen Robinson. I do like Anthony Miller, but he's kind of sounds like he's on the outs. They had Darnell Mooney step up last year for them as well. But Riley Ridley was a guy I liked in that draft class. He's the brother of Calvin Ridley. So if maybe he can have that year 3 boom, maybe he can carve out a larger role in this preseason for the Bears. I just need to see what this Bears offense also is looking like. Is it going to be Justin Fields, Andy Dalton? I hope it's Justin Fields. I love that kid. And if it is and really has a role in the offense, he could be a potential deep sleeper for you guys. So just watch his role unfold too. Andy Isabella is the last guy. He's a guy I thought could be a big field stretcher. He's done it maybe once or twice in this game. He's in a loaded wide receiver room. But again, as the theme has been for this tier of groups, is if injuries start to happen to any of those wide receiver rooms these guys are in, these guys are going to get a bigger role. So just remember these names if those happens. And these are more of deep handcuff guys. Some of these guys are really dependent on the size of your league. Some of these guys are maybe more of like 16-team leagues, 14-team leagues. So yeah, man, that's my first video for YouTube. Went a lot longer than I expected. I want to try to keep these videos as short as possible. So I can produce more of them. I hope you guys did enjoy this episode. I'm not sure what I got planned going forward. I'm thinking about doing some team season previews. I'm just trying to figure that out as I'm also looking at other potential opportunities, but I've been itching to get my YouTube channel going, so I wanted to do this, and I figured most people know I love year 3 wide receivers, so why not talk about that so you guys can get ready for your upcoming fantasy football season. If you guys enjoyed this, please subscribe to my channel. Please like this video, share it, tell a friend, whatever you got to do. And also, I do want to point out this really quick, guys. If anybody remembers last year, we released a prospect encyclopedia, an idea from my boy Roy Countryman. that is being released underneath the Draft Bible name, and I was lucky to be a part of that. I wrote the Colts sections, the Bills, the Bucks, the Seahawks, and the Vikings. That will be coming out at the end of the month. Around training camp, I believe. We don't have a set date, last I've been told, but that'll be coming out at the end of the month. You can actually pre-order the PDF of the Prospect Encyclopedia at allaccessfootball.com. If you go to my channel here on YouTube, when you go up to the banner, there's actually a link you can click and you can go pre-order that. So I did want to promote that. Other than that, guys, enjoy your day. Thank you for tuning in. I'll talk to you in my next video. See ya.